They're nothing but leeches in this family." My brother's voice cut through the birthday dinner like a blade through silk, his laughter echoing off crystal chandeliers that suddenly felt too bright, too sharp. 30 candles flickered on Mom's untouched cake, their flames dancing like they were trying to escape what was happening at this mahogany table. Her hands trembled above the wax, afraid to make a wish in a room that had just turned her into a punchline. Wine glasses lifted in a cruel toast, business partners choking on laughter, father nodding his approval while his 53-year-old wife sat there, mascara bleeding down her cheeks like black rain. But they didn't know the truth about me, about what I'd been building in secret for the past 2 years while they called me the family disappointment. My name is Sofia Martinez, I'm 33 years old, and I'm sitting at a mahogany dining table long enough for kings, watching my mother occupy the smallest chair like she's apologizing for existing. The Riverside Country Club's private dining room was a cathedral of wealth and privilege, all dark wood paneling and oil paintings of dead men who'd probably never worked a day past their 30th birthday. Crystal chandeliers cast amber light across place settings that cost more than most people's monthly rent, each piece of silverware polished to mirror perfection. But it was the people around this table that turned elegance into something ugly. Father held court at the head, naturally. Richard Martinez, broad shoulders filling out a custom Armani suit, voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built a construction empire from concrete and intimidation. When he spoke, it sounded like a gavel hitting hardwood, final and unforgiving. His arrogance was poured neat, no chaser, and he served it to everyone within earshot. My brother David sat to his right like a crown prince waiting for coronation. At 35, he'd inherited all of Dad's confidence and none of his work ethic. His Rolex caught the candlelight every time he gestured, which was constantly, each movement calculated to remind everyone at this table exactly how successful he'd become managing other people's money. His smirk was calibrated for cruelty, sharp enough to cut glass and twice as dangerous. Their friends filled the remaining seats like an audience gathered for a show they'd paid good money to see. Men in $1,000 suits with cufflinks that probably cost more than my car. Their laughter was practiced, professional, the kind of sounds people make when they're being paid to find someone amusing. Eyes scanning for weakness like hunters waiting at a blind, ready to pounce the moment they scented vulnerability. And there, across from me in a navy blue dress she'd worn to 3 family gatherings because it was the nicest thing in her closet, sat my mother. Elena Martinez looked like royalty dressed as a servant. 53 years old, silver threading through black hair she still wore in the same style she'd had when she married into money 28 years ago. The pearls around her throat were the same ones Dad had given her for their 5th anniversary, back when he still pretended to love her instead of just tolerating her presence. She'd spent the morning getting ready for this dinner, her birthday dinner, applying makeup with the careful precision of someone trying to hide how tired she was. But no amount of concealer could cover the way her shoulders curved inward, like she was trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable, less of a burden on people who should have celebrated her existence. 8 years, that's how long they'd been calling me useless. 8 years since I'd graduated college with a business degree and made the mistake of thinking I could prove my worth to people who'd already decided I had none. The family disappointment who'd left home with big dreams and came back empty-handed, at least as far as they could see. Still living in that studio apartment in Queens, Dad would tell his golf buddies, his voice carrying just the right note of paternal disappointment, 33 and still figuring herself out. David was worse. He'd turned my struggles into dinner party entertainment, regaling clients with stories about his lost little sister who couldn't hold down a real job, who bounced from one creative endeavor to another like a pinball hitting bumpers. I'd learned to endure their jokes, their casual cruelty, their assumption that success was measured only in stock portfolios and square footage. I'd developed thick skin and thicker silence, letting their words bounce off me like rain off a windshield. But tonight was different. Tonight, as I watched Mom try to smile while they toasted her birthday with the kind of backhanded affection that felt more like assassination, something crystallized in my chest. I thought I could endure their jokes, their dismissive laughter, their casual cruelty that carved pieces off my self-worth like a butcher trimming fat, until they aimed the knife at her. The first cut came during the appetizer course, when Dad raised his champagne glass and announced to the table, "To Elena, who's given us so many years of dedication." The pause before dedication was surgical. It hung in the air like smoke, letting everyone at that table understand exactly what he meant. That my mother's 28 years of marriage, of raising his children, of hosting his clients and managing his household, amounted to nothing more than faithful service. Mom's smile wavered like a candle flame in wind, but she lifted her glass anyway, because that's what she'd been trained to do. Perform gratitude for scraps of acknowledgement. The second cut came during the main course, when David leaned back in his chair and addressed the table like he was giving a presentation to investors. You know what I love about family dinners? Getting to see where I came from really puts success in perspective. His eyes swept across Mom and me with the calculating gaze of someone appraising used furniture. The message was clear. We were the before picture in his success story, the obstacles he'd overcome to become the golden son. But I could feel the weight of the villa keys in my purse, pressing against my ribs like a secret heartbeat. 2 years of 12-hour days, of building something they couldn't see or measure or dismiss with their practiced indifference. 2 years of planning for this exact moment. They had no idea what was coming. The dinner unfolded like a choreographed performance of wealth and power. White-gloved waiters glided between chairs with the practiced invisibility of people trained to serve without being seen. Wine poured in perfect arcs, burgundy liquid catching crystal and candlelight as it filled glasses worth more than most people's monthly salary. Silverware clinked against bone china with the delicate percussion of privilege, each sound carefully orchestrated to remind everyone at this table exactly where they sat in the hierarchy of American success. But beneath the surface elegance, the real show was just beginning. The whispers started during the second course, floating across the mahogany like poison gas designed to asphyxiate slowly. She barely contributes anything, you know. The comment came from Marcus Webb, one of Dad's golf partners, his voice pitched just loud enough for Mom to hear but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. His wife Helen nodded sagely, as if discussing the weather rather than my mother's worth as a human being. 2 women living off scraps like grateful puppies, added James Patterson, whose construction company had been underbidding Dad's projects for the past 5 years. Must be nice, having everything handed to you. Each word landed like a drop of acid on skin. I watched Mom's face remain perfectly composed, her smile frozen in place like it had been carved from marble, but I could see her hands trembling in her lap, fingers twisted together like she was trying to keep herself from falling apart piece by piece. Dead weight wrapped in silk and pearls, Helen Webb murmured, her voice carrying the particular cruelty that only comes from women who've married their way into money and forgotten what it felt like to earn respect. The birthday cake sat untouched at the center of the table, 37 candles flickering like tiny funeral pyres. Mom was 53, but Dad had insisted on 37 candles. The age she was when she looked her best, he'd announced with the casual cruelty of someone commenting on the weather. That's when Father stood up, his chair scraping against hardwood with the authority of a judge calling court to session. The room fell silent as Richard Martinez prepared to hold court, his champagne glass catching the light like a weapon. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice boomed across the private dining room with the practiced projection of someone accustomed to commanding attention. I'd like to propose a toast to the pillars of this family. Eyes drifted past Mom and me like we were furniture someone had forgotten to dust. The collective gaze of 8 successful people landed squarely on David, their golden boy, their proof that the Martinez bloodline produced winners. To those who build, who create, who carry the family name forward with pride. Glasses lifted in unison, crystal catching candlelight like tiny stars scattered across the table. Cheers erupted from throats that had been lubricated with $300 wine, voices raised in celebration of success they'd inherited rather than earned. The cake's candles flickered in the draft created by their enthusiasm, flames dancing like they were trying to escape what was happening around them. That's when my brother David leaned back in his chair, his Rolex catching the light as he gestured with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never doubted his own importance. You know what, Dad? His voice cut through the applause like a scalpel through skin. Let's be honest about what we're really celebrating here. The room went quiet with the particular silence that precedes either a revelation or an execution. They're nothing but leeches in this family. The words detonated like a bomb in that elegant dining room. 8 pairs of eyes swiveled toward Mom and me, cataloging our reactions with the hungry anticipation of spectators at a gladiator match. The friends erupted in laughter that sounded like breaking glass. Wine glasses crashed against each other in toasts that celebrated cruelty disguised as honesty. Marcus Webb actually slapped his knee, his face red with the kind of mirth that only comes from watching someone else's humiliation. Finally, someone said it. Helen Webb crowed, her voice sharp enough to cut diamonds. About time we acknowledged the elephant in the room. My mother forced herself to laugh. A sound as brittle as breaking china, as hollow as an empty grave. Her hands folded in her lap, trying to hide tremors that ran through her fingers like earthquake aftershocks. She'd spent 53 years learning to perform gratitude for scraps of acknowledgement, and even now, even with her own son calling her a parasite at her birthday dinner, she was trying to be the gracious hostess. But I wasn't laughing. I was remembering. I was 15, lying in my narrow bed in our old house, back when we lived in a 3-bedroom ranch in Queens instead of Dad's Westchester mansion. The sound of Mom's sewing machine whirring downstairs at midnight, threads snapping with the persistence of someone who refused to quit despite broken equipment and tired eyes. She'd been taking in alterations to help pay for my school clothes, working until her fingers bled because Dad's construction business was going through a rough patch and money was tight. I'd crept downstairs to find her hunched over yards of fabric, pins between her lips, tears streaming down her cheeks as she tried to make ends meet with needle and thread. "One day, Sophia," she'd whispered when she noticed me watching from the doorway, "one day you'll stand taller than their laughter." Their laughter. Even then, even when we had nothing, she'd known that someday we'd be surrounded by people who'd try to make us feel small. But she'd also known that laughter was temporary. That cruel people eventually had to face the truth about themselves. And tonight, sitting at this mahogany table while my brother called us parasites and my father's friends toasted our humiliation, I could feel the weight of villa keys pressing against my ribs like a heartbeat. 2 years of building something they couldn't see. 2 years of planning for exactly this moment. Their laughter was about to die in their throats, and I was going to be the one holding the knife. The laughter was still echoing off the mahogany walls when David's palm slapped against my back with the casual cruelty of someone including me in a joke I was supposed to find funny. "Come on, Soph," he said, his voice carrying that particular brand of condescension that masqueraded as affection. "You know it's true. At least you have a sense of humor about it." Heat rose from my chest like steam from a kettle, but something strange happened to my face. Instead of flushing red with humiliation, it cooled into something that felt like marble, smooth, unbreakable, cold as winter granite. I smiled. Not the broken, apologetic smile I'd been wearing for 8 years of family dinners. This was something different, something that tasted like justice and felt like power. The room still vibrated with their cruel amusement, 8 successful people drowning in the sound of their own superiority, wine glasses raised like weapons celebrating a victory over women they'd never bothered to understand. But my pulse was pounding louder than their laughter now, each heartbeat counting down the seconds until everything they thought they knew about our family exploded like a grenade in that elegant dining room. I reached into my purse with the deliberate precision of someone defusing a bomb. My fingers found the cool metal immediately. 2 years of planning condensed into keys that weighed more than gold, more than diamonds, more than every insult they'd ever thrown at me and Mom. The room was still shaking with their amusement when I lifted my hand, the keys catching candlelight like stars being born. The metallic click when they hit the mahogany table sounded like a gunshot in a library. Silence didn't fall. It crashed down like a building collapsing, crushing their laughter under the weight of something they couldn't immediately identify but instinctively feared. 8 pairs of eyes swiveled toward the keys like compass needles finding true north. The gold keychain caught the crystal chandelier light, reflecting tiny rainbows across faces that had suddenly lost their confidence. "What's this?" Father's voice carried less authority than usual, confusion bleeding through his practiced command. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against hardwood with the deliberate pace of someone who'd waited 33 years for this exact moment. Every eye in that room tracked my movement like I was a wild animal they weren't sure how to categorize. "This isn't a joke," I said, my voice carrying across that private dining room with the clarity of crystal striking crystal. "This is the contract for a new villa in Malibu. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, ocean view from every window. Worth $2.8 million. The silence deepened, became something physical you could touch. Helen Webb's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Marcus Patterson's fork hovered in midair, like time had stopped between one breath and the next. "Under Mom's name." Those 4 words detonated like dynamite in that mahogany-paneled room. I watched David's face drain of color, watched his expensive watch suddenly seem heavy as an anchor on his wrist. Father's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for water it couldn't find. From now on, I continued, each word precise as a surgeon's scalpel, she won't have to depend on anyone, won't have to smile through your jokes, won't have to pretend that being called a leech at her own birthday dinner is somehow amusing. Mom's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks like silver rivers in candlelight. But these weren't the tears of humiliation she'd been crying 5 minutes ago. These were something else entirely. That's impossible, David stammered, his golden boy confidence cracking like cheap veneer. You work in retail. You live in a studio apartment. You drive a 15-year-old Honda. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the bank transfer confirmation that still made my heart race every time I saw it. 2 years of building an online business they'd dismissed as playing on the computer. 2 years of 80-hour weeks they'd written off as still figuring herself out. I've been running a digital marketing company for the past 2 years, I said, my voice steady as bedrock. Started with $50 and a laptop in that studio apartment you love mocking. Last month's revenue was $340,000. The numbers hit that room like artillery shells. I watched successful men who'd built their identities on being superior to everyone else suddenly realized they'd been looking down on someone who'd surpassed them while they were busy celebrating their own stagnation. Impossible, Father breathed, but his voice carried no conviction. The evidence was sitting right there on the table, reflecting candlelight like truth made manifest. The villa's already furnished, I continued, pulling out the real estate contract from my purse like I was dealing cards in a poker game where I held all the aces. Move-in ready. Mom, you don't have to pack anything but the things that matter to you. Helen Webb set down her wine glass with trembling fingers. You bought your mother a house? I bought my mother freedom, I corrected. Freedom from people who think love comes with conditions. Freedom from family members who measure worth in dollar signs and decide that women who've sacrificed everything for their children's success are somehow parasites. The shift in the room's energy was seismic. These people who'd been laughing at us 5 minutes ago were now staring at a daughter who'd just casually dropped $2.8 million on her mother's independence. The same mother, I added, my voice carrying the sharp edge of justice served cold, who took in sewing at midnight to pay for school clothes, who worked 3 part-time jobs so David could have guitar lessons, who sacrificed her own dreams so this family could build the wealth you're all sitting here celebrating. David's face had gone from pale to green, the color of someone watching their entire worldview collapse in real time. And I wasn't finished yet. My words cut through that mahogany-paneled room cleaner than crystal, sharper than the finest surgical steel. Each syllable landed with the precision of someone who'd spent 2 years planning exactly how this moment would unfold. The reaction shots were cinematic in their perfection. Father's fork froze halfway to his mouth, a piece of $70 Wagyu beef balanced on sterling silver like evidence of a crime he'd forgotten committing. His eyes, those same brown eyes that had looked at me with disappointment for 33 years, were now wide with something that looked dangerously close to fear. David's smirk collapsed like wet plaster hitting marble. All that practiced arrogance, that golden boy confidence he'd worn like armor since childhood, crumbled in real time. His mouth opened and closed without sound, his brain struggling to process information that didn't fit the narrative he'd built about his loser little sister. Around the table, their friends, these titans of industry who'd been laughing at our expense 5 minutes ago, glanced between each other with the confused panic of people who'd just realized they'd been mocking someone who could buy and sell them twice over. The silence was thick as spilled honey, coating everything it touched with the sticky weight of revelation. But it was Mom's reaction that broke my heart and rebuilt it in the same moment. Her hand flew to her lips, fingers trembling like autumn leaves in wind. Tears flooded her eyes but didn't fall, years of learned restraint holding back an ocean of emotions she'd never been allowed to express. The dam of decades was cracking, hairline fractures spreading across 30 years of swallowed pride and accepted humiliation. Sophia, she whispered, my name barely audible above the sound of her own breathing. You. How did you? The same way you taught me, Mom. By working harder than anyone thought possible, by refusing to quit when things got difficult, by remembering that worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. I turned back to the table full of people who'd spent the evening measuring our value in dollar signs and stock options, their faces now pale as funeral shrouds in the candlelight. From this night forward, I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone who'd finally learned her own power. She doesn't need any of you. Not your money, not your permission, not your approval, and certainly not your laughter. The words detonated like explosives in that crystal-laden room. I watched 8 successful people realize simultaneously that the family hierarchy they'd been celebrating all evening had just been completely inverted. Marcus Webb started to cough, a nervous, choking sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his throat. His wife Helen reached for her wine glass with trembling fingers, misjudged the distance, and sent it tumbling toward the marble floor. The crystal shattered against stone with the sound of everything they thought they knew about us breaking into irreparable pieces. 2.8 million? David finally managed to croak, his voice barely above a whisper. You have $2.8 million. I have a business that generates more than that annually, I corrected, watching his golden boy facade crumble like a house built on quicksand. The villa is just the beginning. Mom's also getting a trust fund that'll pay her living expenses for the rest of her life. No strings attached, no conditions, no requirements to smile through anyone else's cruelty. Father's champagne glass slipped from his nerveless fingers, joining Helen's wine glass in crystal ruins on the marble floor. The sound echoed through the private dining room like gunshots in a mausoleum. That's impossible, he breathed. But even he didn't believe his own words anymore. The evidence was sitting right there on the table, reflecting candlelight like truth made manifest. You want to know what's impossible, Dad? I leaned forward, my voice dropping to the kind of quiet that makes people strain to listen. What's impossible is spending 8 years watching you treat the woman who sacrificed everything for this family like she was a burden instead of a blessing. The orchestra of ridicule that had been playing all evening died mid-note. Even the waiters had stopped moving, frozen in the doorway like they were afraid to disturb whatever was happening at our table. The woman who worked 3 jobs so David could have guitar lessons, who took in sewing at midnight so I could have decent school clothes, who smiled through your business dinners for 28 years while you introduced her as the wife like she didn't have a name or an identity beyond your convenience. Mom was openly crying now, but these weren't the tears of humiliation she'd been shedding earlier. These were something else entirely, relief, maybe, or recognition, or the sound of prison doors finally swinging open. You called us leeches, I continued, standing up so that everyone at that table had to look up at me for the first time in our lives. But leeches take blood without giving anything back. Mom gave you everything, her youth, her dreams, her unconditional love, and all you gave her in return was the privilege of being tolerated in her own family. James Patterson cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should. Perhaps you should shut up, I said with the casual authority of someone who'd just revealed she could buy his construction company as a weekend hobby. You don't get to speak anymore, any of you. You lost that privilege when you raised your glasses to toast our humiliation. The silence that followed wasn't just absence of sound, it was the death of an entire social order. The hierarchy that had governed our family dinners for decades had just been obliterated by a woman in a discount dress who'd turned out to be richer than all of them combined. The car will be here in 20 minutes, I said, checking my phone with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to having drivers at her disposal. Mom, you don't have to pack tonight. Everything you need is already waiting in Malibu. She stood up on shaking legs, her navy blue dress suddenly looking regal instead of shabby, her decade-old pearls catching the light like stars being reborn. And for the first time in 30 years, Elena Martinez walked away from a family dinner with her head held high. Father's composure shattered like the crystal glasses littering the marble floor. His face flushed red as aged wine, veins bulging at his temples with the pressure of a man whose entire worldview was collapsing in real time. Where did you get this money? His voice boomed across that private dining room with the fury of someone who'd built his identity on being the most successful person in every room. What kind of scheme are you running? What laws did you break? The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gun that had just fired. Even now, even with documented proof of my success spread across his mahogany table, Richard Martinez couldn't accept that his useless daughter had surpassed him without cheating, stealing, or manipulating her way to the top. I looked at this man who'd spent 33 years teaching me that love was conditional on performance, that worth was measured in quarterly earnings, that daughters were investments that rarely paid adequate dividends. Not a scheme, Dad. Years of work you never cared to see. My voice carried the calm authority of someone who'd finally learned that other people's opinions couldn't diminish facts. While you were mocking my little computer games, I was building a digital empire from that studio apartment you love dismissing. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the business banking app that still made my heart race every time I opened it. Advantage Digital Marketing. Founded 2 years ago with $50 and a borrowed laptop. Current monthly revenue, $430,000. Annual projections, 6.2 million. The numbers hit that room like artillery shells. I watched men who'd built their fortunes on concrete and steel realize they'd been looking down on someone who'd conquered territories they couldn't even comprehend. Impossible, Father breathed, but his protest carried no conviction. The bank statements were right there, glowing on my phone screen like mathematical proof that everything he'd believed about success was decades out of date. That's when David finally found his voice, though it cracked with the strain of someone watching his entire identity dissolve. You think this makes you important? His words came out as a snarl, all pretense of brotherly affection burned away by the acid of his own inadequacy. You think buying Mom a house suddenly makes you the hero of this family? I turned toward my golden boy brother, the one who'd inherited Dad's confidence and none of his work ethic, who'd spent our entire lives being celebrated for mediocrity, while I was criticized for excellence. No, David. It proves Mom was never your burden to carry. Each word was precise as a surgeon's scalpel, cutting through 30 years of family mythology with ruthless efficiency. I am her daughter. Her defender. The one you called useless tonight, who gave her freedom while you were busy humiliating her for sport. The counterstrike landed with devastating accuracy. David's face went through several shades of pale, finally settling on the gray of old newspaper left in rain. You want to know what makes someone important? I continued, my voice carrying across that crystal-laden dining room with the authority of someone who'd finally claimed her own power. It's not the size of your trust fund or the logo on your watch. It's what you do when people you love are being hurt by people who should protect them. Around the table, their friends, these titans of industry who'd been toasting our humiliation 20 minutes ago, couldn't meet my eyes. Marcus Webb stared at his plate like it contained the secrets of the universe. Helen Patterson examined her manicure with the fascination of someone discovering hands for the first time. James Patterson cleared his throat nervously, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd planned to say. The same man who'd called us deadweight in silk was now afraid to speak in front of women he'd dismissed as parasites. The toast that had started this evening in celebration had turned to poison in their mouths. Wine glasses sat abandoned like evidence of crimes they wished they hadn't committed. No one dared take another sip, afraid that acknowledging their thirst would somehow acknowledge their complicity. The power dynamic in that room had shifted so completely it was giving everyone whiplash. But it was Mom's reaction that made everything else fade into background noise. Elena Martinez, 53 years old, silver threading through black hair, wearing a navy blue dress from 3 seasons ago, reached across that mahogany table with trembling fingers and wrapped them around the villa keys. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped them, not like someone afraid they'd disappear, but like someone reclaiming something that had always belonged to her: dignity, respect. The right to exist without apologizing for taking up space in her own life. She didn't say a word, didn't need to. The silence around that table was deafening, broken only by the soft ticking of an antique clock that had witnessed more family dramas than a soap opera writer could imagine. For the first time in 28 years of marriage, Elena Martinez was holding something that belonged entirely to her. Something her husband couldn't take away, couldn't use as leverage, couldn't weaponize during their next argument about household budgets or vacation destinations. The deed is already filed, I said quietly, my words meant for her ears but carrying to every corner of that suddenly small dining room. It's yours. No cosigners, no conditions, no strings attached. You can change the locks tomorrow if you want. Her fingers tightened around those keys like they were lifelines thrown to someone who'd been drowning in other people's expectations for 3 decades. And in that grip, in that moment of silent reclamation, I saw something I'd never seen in my mother's face before. Not gratitude, not relief. Power. The kind of power that comes from finally understanding that you don't have to accept other people's assessment of your worth. That freedom isn't something you earn through good behavior. It's something you claim because you deserve to breathe without permission. For 33 years, I'd watched this woman make herself smaller so other people could feel bigger. Watched her apologize for existing, for needing, for having opinions that might inconvenience the men who decided her value. But the woman sitting across from me now, clutching keys to her own independence, looked like someone who'd finally remembered her own name. The transformation happened in the space between two heartbeats. My mother lifted her eyes from the villa keys and met my father's gaze. There was no fear left, no fragile hope of being accepted. Her eyes were steady, final. They didn't ask permission, didn't plead for mercy, they declared. I'm done. The woman who endured your cruelty with a broken smile is gone. Tonight, you're looking at someone you never cared to understand. Richard Martinez, the so-called king of construction, a man who built empires and crushed people with contracts flinched. For the first time in their marriage, Elena looked at him as an equal, and he had no idea how to face it. Elena, he stammered, voice stripped of its command. Surely you don't believe. I don't believe, Richard. She cut him off, her voice calm, sharp as glass. I know exactly who I married. I know what you think of me. And I know I don't have to pretend anymore. It was a death, in a way the death of 30 years of bending, apologizing, shrinking herself to fit into the tiny box he had built for her. Elena, as she once was, died at that table. David tried to reclaim the room, his voice trembling. Mom, you can't seriously think Sophia. Why not Sophia? She snapped, her eyes blazing. The daughter who remembered my birthday without turning it into a joke? The only one who saw my worth while her father and brother treated me like dead weight? The words cracked like thunder, and David dropped his eyes. His mask of superiority dissolved. She spent 2 years building something extraordinary, Mom went on, while the rest of you were too busy teaching me how grateful I should be just to exist in this family. Around the table, business partners who had once toasted to our humiliation sat frozen, staring down at their plates. Not one dared to meet our eyes. 37 candles flickered on an untouched cake, their flames dancing like tiny spirits celebrating in secret. That perfect cake, unsliced, became a monument to decades of parties without love. I rose to my feet. The scrape of my chair on the marble floor echoed like a blade slicing through silence. Happy birthday, Mom, I said, my voice ringing across the vaulted ceilings. Tonight, you're free. The words hung there like a benediction. Mom's tears shimmered in the candlelight, no longer the tears of shame but of release. She rose beside me. Her navy dress, simple, unadorned, suddenly looked regal. The worn pearls at her throat gleamed like diamonds. After 28 years, Elena Martinez left the dinner table without asking permission, without apologizing for existing. The room remained frozen. 8 powerful men and women sat like statues around that mahogany table, their cruelty shattered, their laughter turned to ash. I stood taller than their scorn, grounded in the truth they had buried for decades. They had called us parasites, leeches wrapped in silk and pearls. But tonight, the useless daughter became the pillar, rewriting the family narrative with legal documents and unconditional love. The villa keys glimmered as Mom slipped them into her purse, not with the fear of losing them, but with the certainty that freedom had finally become hers, not as a reward for obedience, but as a right she had always deserved. We moved toward the door. 2 women once treated as burdens now walked away as the architects of their own destinies. Behind us, my father's voice broke the silence, smaller than I had ever heard it. Elena, Sophia, please. Mom paused at the threshold. She looked at the man who had taught her that love had conditions, that worth was measured in profits, that a wife was merely an investment. Goodbye, Richard, she said, her voice final. And for the first time in her life, Elena Martinez left a family dinner without looking back. The click of our heels on marble sounded like applause, not from the people who had belittled us, but from the universe itself, honoring the moment 2 women claimed their worth. Behind us, 37 candles still burned, their flames bright and unyielding, celebrating not just a birthday, but a rebirth. They once called me useless. Tonight, I gave my mother the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that she was enough. She had always been enough. She would always be enough. And that was worth more than every villa in Malibu. Sophia's story isn't just about money or success. It's about the moment you realize that other people's limitations don't define your possibilities. It's about understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is showing someone they don't have to accept being treated as less than they are. If this story reminded you of your own family dynamics, if it made you think about someone in your life who deserves better, hit that like button and subscribe. Turn on notifications because next week we're diving into another story about hidden strength and unexpected victories. Share this with someone who needs to remember that success isn't about proving wrong people right, it's about building something so undeniable that their opinions become irrelevant. Remember, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be small for people who are never going to celebrate your growth anyway. Until next time, keep building your empire while they're busy explaining why you can't.